Trance of Empathy. This skill is an aura skill. We activate it once and it stays on until we die. It has a radius of effect, which means that it also affects your allies, other players and your pets. We get two abilities from this skill, the attack damage converted to health and the damage reflected. The attack damage converted to health is a very nice help because every time we hit enemies with our weapons and shields, we gain back some health and it helps with survivability. This one is also good for the survivability of our pets because those two get the same ability from the skill. The good thing about the skill is that it stacks with attack damage converted to health that we get from other sources, from items for example, and the bad thing is that this ability doesn't work against all types of enemies. It works for the majority of enemies except for undead enemies, devices and constructs, but for the most part it works. The second ability of the skill is the damage reflected. This one can go up to 60% if you upgrade the skill to its maximum level 12, and also it can stack with damage reflected that we get from other sources. This number here means that when enemies attack you, they will get back 60% of their attack damage and they will damage themselves. To get the most out of it, you would need to stack more of this effect by finding good items for the job. And don't forget that damage reflected does not cap at 100%. It can go even higher, much higher. Trance of Convalescence. This is one more aura skill. It provides damage absorption, health and energy regeneration. It also affects allies and pets, so it is a great skill for both pet builds and also multiplayer sessions. Energy reserved is like a cost that we pay for the skill to be active. It means that down here in our energy bar, 100 energy points will not be available to us for casting skills, so for example, if we have 556 energy points and activate the skill, then 100 of the points become unavailable and we now can use only 456 points. So in case we had a skill that required 457 points to activate, we would not be able to cast it because now we have only 456 points. The damage absorption that we get from the skill works only against physical attacks, both melee and ranged ones, so it improves our survivability. Health and energy regeneration are very useful and can stack with the same abilities that we get from other sources like items for example. On level 12, this skill gives 15% damage absorption, plus 12 health regeneration and plus 3.2 energy regeneration. The damage absorption that we get from the skill works against all types of attacks, both melee and ranged ones, so it improves our survivability. Trance of Wrath. This is the third and final trance skill of this mastery, and as the description says, we can only have one active. The meter radius of the skill grows as we put more points into it, and the same happens to the electrical burn damage over time and reduced resistances over time. The skill disruption is a fixed number and there is no way to increase it. This skill deals electrical burn damage over time. It is a dot skill. Electrical burn damage is a lightning element type of dot, and one way to increase the damage of the skill is by increasing the levels of it, while the other way is to use items or even other skills that provide plus a percentage of elemental or lightning damage. Of course, putting attribute points to intelligence also increases our overall elemental damage. If we take the skill to its cap at 12, it deals 182 damage over 4 seconds. This means that for each one of the 4 seconds, the skill deals 1/4 of this number, so it would be 45.5 points per second. On the other hand, the reduced resistances number doesn't get divided by 4. It reduces all resistances of enemies except for armor for 4 seconds, so for this time the enemies will have 32% reduced resistances. Of course, reduced resistances means that the electrical burn damage of the skill deals even more damage than what this number shows, and it would be a great idea to try and reduce the resistances of our enemies even further by using other skills and items with the skill. The more you reduce resistances, the more powerful the skill becomes. The skill Disruption ability interrupts some of the attacks of the enemies surrounding you, so it helps with your survivability. The last thing to remember is that this skill applies only to you, not to your pets, not to other players in multiplayer. Lucid Dream. This is a great skill because it provides more damage to physical, vitality and electrical burn as percentages. This detail is important because when we get a percentage of damage instead of a flat number of damage, then this percentage increases all of our attacks with items of that type of damage, but it also increases the damage of all of our skills that deal the same type of damage, even if these skills come from another mastery. So, this skill could work on at least 3 different types of builds since it provides buffs for 3 different types of damage. Premonition. This skill is very nice. Offensive ability works only with melee attacks and also it helps with dealing critical damage to enemies. Again, only melee attacks can deal critical damage and only if your melee attacks deals physical or pierce damage. Melee attacks of elemental damage do not crit. Defensive is also very powerful and increases your survivability, especially against critical damage from enemies. The more defensive ability you have, the less critical damage you take. So, this skill is great and you want to use it in all types of builds that you make, even if you don't need offensive ability in case you play a ranged build or a spellcaster. The defensive ability it provides is always useful. Temporal Flux. A very nice skill, the total speed ability increases all types of speed and it can be used along with other skills and items that provide more total speed. Total speed itself has no cap because it increases at the same time 4 individual types of speed that each one of those do have a cap. For more details about the speed in this game, you can watch the game guide video in the description. The Avoid Projectiles is a very useful ability for survivability reasons and it helps against all types of projectiles. The good thing about it is that we can stack it with other skills and items so we can get an even bigger amount of projectile evasion. What we said for the other two applies also to slow resistance. Slow resistance is a secondary type of resistance, but for some builds it can be crucial, so it helps very much. The great thing about secondary resistances, such as this one, is that these do not receive a penalty when we play on higher difficulties, so it is easier to get it to its maximum, which is 80%. Surge of Sleep. This is a nice skill for crowd controlling enemies. If many enemies come at you at once, you can use it on them and make them sleep for a while. This is very helpful for killing them easier and even better when you need to escape and your enemies run fast enough to catch you, so you put them to sleep and you go away. Putting points increases the time they will sleep over, and actually you could increase the duration of the skill by using some items that provide a buff for sleep duration, although there are not many items in the game providing this buff. Anyway, this skill is mostly for leveling new characters. It could also be used in advanced builds, but not so much. Let's not forget an important detail. Not all enemies can be put to sleep. This skill will not work on every enemy in the game, and of course it will not work against bosses. Summon Nightmare. This is one more pet of this game and it works as all pets do. It has its own energy bar which it uses to cast its abilities, and it has 2 abilities. Up to level 4 it is using the Psionic Beam ability, but when we take it to level 5 it unlocks its second ability, the Dream Surge skill. The first skill hits only one enemy, while the second is an AoE skill which hits multiple enemies in one attack. The second one also converts some of the pet's attack damage to health, but this health goes back to the pet, it doesn't go back to our characters. Also, when we increase the level of the pet, its chances to dodge attacks and projectiles increases and it helps with its survivability. These two chances cap at 51% on level 18 and stop there. After level 18 there is no increase at all on this pet. Hypnotic Gaze. This is a very nice addition to the abilities of this pet because it helps with crowd controlling some enemies that get confused, and also it reduces the resistances of enemies, meaning that both our attacks and the attacks of our pets deal more damage against those enemies. The more points we invest in this skill, the more both the duration of confusion and the reduced resistances increase, with maximum being a 50% reduction in resistances at 8.5 seconds of confusion on level 12 out of 8. One detail to remember is that if an enemy is affected by Trance of Wrath and has its resistances reduced by that skill, then the reduction from a Hypnotic Gaze will not stack with the one from the trance. Instead, if the number from Hypnotic Gaze is bigger than the one of Wrath's, then this number will replace the lower number from the trance and vice versa. For example, an enemy is affected from level 5 Trance of Wrath and has its resistances reduced by 18%. If now this enemy takes an attack from level 5 Hypnotic Gaze, which deals 22% reduced resistances, then the 18% of the skill stops working and now the 22% of this one is active, which means we cannot stack reduction to resistances when they come in the form of a percentage to all resistances. The bigger number replaces the smaller. Mastermind. This is probably the best skill of this pet because it buffs the performance of all of your other pets. It provides more damage, health and energy regeneration. The total damage ability means that it doesn't matter what types of damage your pets deal. They all will get this buff because it affects all types of damage. One thing you should remember is that even though this icon appears in the buffs icons of your own character, it applies only to pets. Your character gets no benefit from this one. Which means if you got to play a pet build with Dream Mastery, then this skill is amazing and you need to use it. Psionic Touch. This is a skill that we can use with our main weapons. It works with all types of weapons, melee, bows, staves and thrown weapons alike. It activates only on the 4th charge, meaning that you attack 3 times, each time counts as a charge level, and on the 4th hit it triggers. So the total damage numbers that you see here are at the vitality damage work only on the 4th attack you do with the skill. Leveling up this skill increases the numbers of damage of the skill, but it doesn't reduce the charge levels. There is a way to trigger this 4th hit more often, and this can happen if we increase our attacking speed, because when we have a very fast attacking speed, we hit faster and we reach the 4th hit sooner. So we deal the damage of the skill more often to our enemies. Another great way for the skill to trigger even more often is to combine it with the volley skill of the Hypnotic Mastery, but this would work only for 3 types of weapons: spears, bows and thrown weapons. If you use the volley skill, which can release 3 projectiles per attack instead of 1 in combination with Psionic Touch, then if in your first hit with Psionic Touch the volley skill trigger and release 3 projectiles, on your second attack the effect of the skill will trigger because the first hit counts as 3 hits or 3 charge levels, because the first hit released 3 projectiles instead of 1. This is a great synergy and can work only with these 3 types of weapons. Psionic Burn. This skill triggers only on the 4th hit, just like the Psionic Touch does, but its performance doesn't get affected by the base skill, which means when it triggers it will not deal the damage shown here, plus the total damage of this one. It will deal only the numbers here. This is a nice skill because it hits multiple targets and also it deals even more damage to demons and also slows down the movement of enemies for some time. So, after it triggers, enemies will receive the electrical burn damage of the skill, but we should not forget that this effect here does not stack with the same effect of the Trance of Wrath. If, for example, an enemy affected by this trance gets hit with Psionic Burn, then only the strongest skill will apply. So, if Trance on level 7 deals 100 damage, and we hit with Psionic Burn, which in level 7 deals 132 damage, then the 132 will replace the 100 of the trance. Also, the effect of this skill doesn't stack with weapons, only the strongest applies. The percentage of more damage to demons means that both of these skills will deal more damage to demons only. Distortion Field. This is a nice skill that can save you when you fight against many enemies at the same time. When it triggers, you get a flat number of damage absorption, a percentage of damage absorption, and a flat number of physical damage retaliation to enemies. The number of damage absorption shows how much damage you negate from incoming attacks of enemies and works with all types of damage: physical, elemental, melee, ranged, etc. For example, if an enemy attacks you with 100 damage and the skill provides 45 damage absorption, you will only receive 55 damage. The physical retaliation works only against enemies that hit you with melee attacks, so they receive this number of damage. Since this skill has only 5% chance to trigger, the best way to use it is to fight against many enemies at the same time. So, if for example 10 enemies hit you one after another, the chances for the skill to trigger go up. And of course, let's not forget that the skill has 15 seconds duration and 30 seconds recharge. This means that to have it active as often as possible, we can do that by reducing the recharge time of our skills. In this case, a 50% reduction to recharge time would be ideal because it would take the cooldown down to 15 seconds, so when the skill wears off, it instantly has a chance to reactivate if you get hit. Phantom Strike. This is a skill that hits one enemy. When it hits, it deals more total damage, which means all types of damage that your attack comes with will increase. For example, if you deal both physical and elemental damage, then both physical and elemental deal more damage with this attack. You need to remember that this skill works only with melee weapons, all types of melee weapons. Staves, thrown weapons and bows are not compatible with the skill. Dream Stealer. This add-on is a great skill, and in general, if you play with Phantom Strike, you need to be using this skill too. The main reason for that is that this skill turns Phantom Strike into an AoE skill because now you hit multiple enemies instead of only one target. The other great thing of this add-on is that it adds a good amount of physical damage to your Phantom Strike, a great amount of energy leech and a few seconds of stunning the enemies. Remember this detail: if you take the skill to its maximum level 8, then the number of the targets it hits increases to 6. But if you take the skill one level above, the number increases to 7, while if you take this skill to level 11, then it increases to 8 targets and it caps to this number. So, to get the most powerful state of the skill, you should take it to +3 levels over cap. Hitting 8 enemies with such a powerful skill is no joke. You deal a tremendous amount of damage. Distort Reality. Here we have one more powerful skill. This one deals physical damage, vitality damage and also stuns enemies for some time. Increasing the level of the skill increases only the two types of damage it deals. The stun duration and the meter radius of the skill are fixed and do not increase per level. If you would like to increase the duration of the stun effect, you could do so by using some items that give a percentage to stun duration, like the Adroit Loop Ring for example. Since this skill deals both physical and vitality damage, we can increase further the damage output of the skill by increasing the strength attribute for the physical damage part and increasing the intelligence attribute for the vitality damage part. Another way to boost the skill is to use items or other skills that provide percentages of more physical or vitality damage, and of course to use items or skills that reduce the resistances of enemies of these two types. Temporal Rift. This is a great add-on and also very useful because it can petrify enemies, so when we use it we have the ability to stun some enemies and petrify some other at the same time, so we can control crowds of enemies and make battles very easier for us. Of course, it deals some electrical burn damage over time, and as we can see, it will deal more damage to demons, which means demons will take not only increased damage from this add-on, but they will take increased damage also by Distort Reality. So demons really get wrecked with the skill. We also get this energy drain effect, which deals damage while draining the energy of our enemies. This is very useful, but it works only against enemies that have an energy bar. There are enemies with no energy bars, so to those enemies this ability is useless. One thing to remember is that the damages of this add-on do not stack with similar types of damage that we get from items, they work separately. Distortion Wave. This skill is actually a spell and the damage type that it deals is physical. So, one of the ways to increase the damage of the skill is to gain more strength attribute by equipping items that provide flat numbers or percentages of strength, and another way would be of course to equip items that provide percentages of physical damage. The only other thing it does is to slow down enemies. The more points we invest in this one, the more the percentage of slow effect increases. The duration of the skill though is fixed and cannot increase by level. This is a great skill because it is also a ranged one, meaning that you cast it from a distance and hit enemies far away. So they receive damage, and when they start running at you, they do not reach you very fast because of the slowdown effect of the skill, and this effect gives you more time to do your next moves during battles. Chaotic Resonance. This add-on is very important. When we look at the skill without having invested any points, we see that it gives some physical damage and some armor reduction for enemies hit by this one. But after we put 1 point, we can see now that we also get minus 3 seconds recharge time. This reduction works only for Distortion Wave skill. It will not work for any other skills in the game. This reduction is very important if you want to be casting Distortion Wave as frequently as possible, and as we can see, the initial recharge time of the skill is 10 seconds, and after we apply 1 point, it goes down to 7 seconds. Let us remember that this number of reduction is fixed and cannot increase by level. Only the physical damage and the reduced armor effect increase by level, and of course the energy cost for casting the skill. By the way, the reduced armor effect means that enemies affected receive more physical damage. So if you use this skill on a target and then use it again on the same target, then he will receive even more damage from the same skill the second time. Psionic Immolation. This skill adds electrical burn damage to enemies hit and also makes demons to receive even more damage, but this buff against demons works also with these two skills. It buffs Distortion Wave overall. Now the great thing is that when we put 1 point here, then as we can see we also get minus 3 seconds recharge time. This one works exactly as the reduction we get from Chaotic Resonance. It adds this reduction and reduces the cooldown of Distortion Wave down to 4 seconds, which is very good for casting the skill frequently enough and destroying enemies. Again, this reduction is fixed and cannot increase by level. Now, if we want to make a build with the primary attack to be Distortion Wave, we can reduce the cooldowns of all skills by using items with recharge reduction and get minus 80% reduction, which is the maximum we can get. If we do that, then the cooldown of Distortion Wave goes down to 0.8 seconds and we can be casting it all the time and obliterate our enemies. Completely.